Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was May 26th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt-cara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is from the Curie Register from Joan. And so this is a court document that possibly Joan never even saw. And so, but it's possible he did. It's just, I'm still trying to figure out, again, one of the big missions of this podcast is to get better at understanding the probata information. Before I get into the details of that and the document itself, I want to let you in on a little secret, which is that I had a really hard time finding a document for May 26th. It's kind of random. Some days they're really busy in that chancery, and the monarchs themselves are churning out a lot of documents, or maybe the chancellor is having a big work day, and you'll see in multiple registers 5 or 6 documents from the same day. And then other times it's hard to find even one. So in those situations, I sometimes go to Daniel Girona y Llagostera's itinerary. That is a work that I've discussed on the podcast several times, but this is not a podcast designed to be listened to through and through from beginning to end, so I like to do a little bit of spiraling curriculum, as they say in the educational world. So anyway, Daniel Girona y Llagostera, I believe it was in the early 20th century, could have been the late 19th century, he set about the task for several of the monarchs of the Crown of Aragon to list where they were on every single day of their reign. And the way he did this is he looked at the dating clauses in the documents, like the documents we're looking at for this podcast. And he didn't spend a ton of time reading and transcribing each one, although he did. For every single year, he transcribed maybe about 30 documents and included them as samples. So he lists out every single day of the year, and then the register and folio, that is the document he found that has the location and the date for that particular monarch on that day, and then he has the location. So Joan stayed in Barcelona for a long time. Really, most of 1387, Joan was in Barcelona. And so you just see it's like these ditto marks going all the way down. Barcelona, Barcelona, Barcelona. And there's only a couple days that Daniel Girona y Llagostera was unable to find a document for 1387. One of them we've already encountered. It's May 5th. And then the other is September 22nd. Now, May 5th coincides with Joan's, the days immediately following Joan's major near-death illness attack that happened. And it's interesting because what I've discovered, which was known by people who study these things, is that the court officials could issue documents in the name of the monarch. And so nothing was really going to stop them from continuing to keep the monarchy going, even in times when the monarch himself or herself was incapacitated. So the fact that we don't have anything for May 5th, it's interesting because it seems to me like maybe they could have. I don't know. Maybe they were at that moment thinking, we'd better pull back and see if Joan's going to survive until tomorrow. But it could also just be that as Joan was limited in his capacity to make final approvals or disapprovals, the document pipeline had to slow down, and they might have just not had anything on that day. They could have been running around doing in-person conversations on that day and not had time to create new documents, maybe related to the turmoil that Joan's very serious illness was causing. At this point, it's difficult to make a guess. So anyway, the reason I bring this up is because I knew going into the project that every day except May 5th and September 22nd, I would have a document that I could discuss. So it made me feel very confident that I could do a document a day for season 1 of the Historian's Notebook. And yet, the digitization piece is one that was an interesting complication because it seemed like Pares, the database that holds all the images of all the registers, was a very dependable place to go. But then in early 2026, Pares was experiencing some kind of technical difficulty, and it was down for like something, maybe it was more like the end of 2025. It was down for like 3 weeks. And the Facebook page for Pares, where I found you can get the most dependable information about what's going on if the site is down, that was full of all of these. I mean, let me specify when I say full. There were like 20 posts onto the Pares Facebook page all about how a certain researcher was like freaking out because they didn't have access to the documents that they needed for their dissertation or deadline or whatever. And so whoever maintains the Pares Facebook page was responding saying, please be patient, we're working on it, da-da-da. And then for most of March and April and May of this year, 2026, you could access Pares without any problem, and you could locate the document that you would need without anything unusual going on. And then maybe this was a mistake. I procrastinated on choosing a document for May 26th and then went for a Memorial Day weekend overnight trip. And so I came back and I was working yesterday. I'm recording this on the morning of May 26th, which is a little bit unusual. I usually like to be like at least a day ahead with my podcast recordings. But I was trying to get to the document on Pares, and Pares was not working. And this morning it continues to not load when you go to the document search page, or even if you have the exact link, like I put in the links to the Pares page for each register, those are not loading. So for the archive of the Crown of Aragon and all the other documents on Pares, I don't think anybody is able to get to them as of May 26th, and all day on May 25th it wasn't working. And so I couldn't get to today's document as the one that was the one I had intended to use, which was from the itinerary of Daniel Girona y Llagostera. So then I went to my kind of next plan B. And those of you who have listened to the podcast when I've talked about the OpenClaw pipeline, you know that part of that process was having entire registers, their images downloaded onto my computer, and then having the agentic AI take those images one by one and put them into Gemini, and then also upload them to Claude in order to get transcriptions from those large language models. The requirement that I had in order to do that was that I would have the images ready for the agentic AI to get from a folder on my computer. So what that entailed was me taking a script, a Python script. Now, that sounds fancy. I personally know hardly anything about Python programming. So I had Claude develop a Python script, and it's really not all that complicated of a task. Basically, I just needed a script to a computer program that moves the mouse, essentially, like opens up a new browser page and then clicks on a certain link in it, basically the link to go to the next document, downloads the image, and then clicks on the link to go to the next document. So it's really only a couple things that have to be done and then just repeated like 300 times for a particular register on Pares that has about 300 images. So the Python script worked, and I have on my computer for about 25 registers all of the image files. And so I knew that I didn't need Pares for the 25 registers that I ran this Python script for and got all of the images onto my computer. And this is a lot of images. This is like, 10,000 images. So basically, I went to my computer, and lo and behold, I could not find a May 26th document in so many registers. It took me 2 hours to find a May 26th document, and when I found one, I feel like I found like the only other one besides the one that Daniel Girona y Llagostera had chosen for his itinerary. Now you might be wondering, why couldn't I just have the images for the register that Daniel Llagostera y Girona had used for this particular document in his itinerary? The answer is that for some reason that register, and I cannot access it right now, so I don't know what that register is in terms of like what are the dates on it, but I prioritized the registers that had content from 1387, and that particular register, for whatever reason, when I looked at it, when I was deciding which ones I would download all the images from using the Python script, that register, it didn't seem to have a lot of documents from 1387. It seemed, and this is what I'm guessing, is that when I looked at it, it looked like one that really had more documents from other years, or it was not going to contain anything personal. It was going to be just like records that were not really all that connected to, like, it wasn't going to be letters to other heads of state. It was going to be just, payments for like humdrum things, which, I mean, I have to say, those can turn out to be extremely interesting. But what I'm really trying to do is find mentions of illness and discussions of the two of them together, Joan and Violante, whenever I can. And those types of documents are just not often going to come up in the humdrum court records types of documents. And so sometimes I skipped a register because I felt like it wouldn't have anything in that more personal category that I'm really trying to focus on. All right, all that said, I regret not downloading that register at the time because it cost me 2 hours of looking through a bunch of different registers in order to get to today's document, which is not super exciting, but I don't know. I'm glad I found it because it does open up this other angle on the question of the financial situation. And we've been looking at that quite a bit this month. All right, let's finally get to the document of the day. The probata information is interesting because the very first word is an unusual one for the probata. Well, maybe not in this register. I don't look at this register too much. But there's the name of the scribe, Bonanam Egedi, I think is how you would pronounce that. But then there's some kind of abbreviation. It looks like it's like an open top A or maybe a U. And it's got a kind of swirly going above it that is often used for something that has to do with an R. So, or maybe it's a well, like the word for or, O-R, in Latin is V-E-L or U-E-L. The U's and the V's were interchangeable in Latin. And so maybe this is starting out with some use of the word well. I cannot tell what's going on there. After the scribe's name, though, we have a nice mandawit. So, was commanded by, and then we've got a rex, commanded by the king. And maybe this is actually not rex, but some other declension of that word. So it could mean something like royal. And then we have factum per, or facta per. And then we have treasorem for the treasurer. So, all right. This was commanded by the king's treasurer, I think. Now, the king's treasurer has written to a particular town. So the first line has Johannes, etc., fidelibus nostris, and our loyal, and then Juratis et probis hominibus, so the town leaders. And then we've got Ville with an abbreviation, something like Willem, so the town of. And then this got confusing because the town, its name has two words. So the first word is Monistrol, which sounded like it could be like a ministry, but that was not what it... Well, maybe it's kind of related etymologically, but we'll get to that in a second. And then we have Montserrat. So the abbreviation in the middle that looks like a P is actually not a P at all, but it is instead with that little hook at the top. It is the abbreviation for SER. So this is Montserrat, the very famous hilltop monastery that was for this region a major site of pilgrimage and a spiritual center. Now, the word that comes before Montserrat, when I just typed Monistrol de Montserrat into Google, what I got was a result for the town that is at the bottom of the mountain. So Montserrat is in this very high up in elevation location in the mountains where it's kind of like isolated but also has like this amazing view. It's easy to see why somebody would identify that as a spiritual place. And if you look at the history of Montserrat, actually it was a pagan worship place before Christianity arrived, and has happened in so many locations around Europe. The pagan religious locations were converted into Christian religious centers. And so the Montserrat Monastery is high up in this majestic location. And then there's a little town at the foot of the mountainside. And that town is named Monistrol de Montserrat. So this village is one that is easy to identify. It's the town that is where like the townspeople are near the monastery of Montserrat. And then after the name of that place, we have salutem et gratiam, which is your standard greeting. All right. So we have very clear information about who this document is addressed to. And remember, this is a court document, so it's not really like a personal missive from the king himself. It is an official, in this case the treasurer, who is sending this to the officials of the town. All right, I will say that AI really saved me in my understanding of this document because it's in Latin. And my Latin comprehension is really not at an expert level. And so basically I use AI as a scaffold in order to get me some clues as to, what is the main verb of a particular sentence and what are the different clauses. So here I got a lot of really helpful assistance, and I feel like, and then I checked it using my online Latin dictionary, Whitaker's, and I feel like I really do understand this Latin document, which is a really big achievement. Oftentimes I come away at the end and I just am still struggling to understand what the purpose of the document is. And in this situation, I think I've got a very clear understanding of what is going on. And I will say that the human in the loop part of working with AI was pretty essential. I had to make some important corrections for some of the key details, and so this was not an agentic AI experience at all. And it benefited, I think, a great deal from the fact that it was not just the AI working alone. All right. What we have in this document is the town of Monistrol de Montserrat getting caught. They got caught doing something bad. They had been collecting taxes without telling the government, the state, the Crown of Aragon, the monarchy. So basically this document is saying that someone told on you, town leaders. They revealed to us, the treasury, the royal treasury, that you have been collecting some kind of tax and you have not been reporting it. And so now, and you've been doing it for 20 years. In line 4, about 5 words in, you've got the 2 X's. So 20, Roman numeral 20, and then anis. 20 years they've been doing this, and now they've been caught. And so they have to show up to Barcelona. They say you show up to Barcelona and you talk to us in person. So line 8, we have ante coram nostro treasurio. Coram means in person, before our treasurer in person. And you need to bring whatever documents you have. That's in line 9. If you have documents, you'd better bring them. But I think we all know that they don't have documents that are going to get them out of this. They are in big, big trouble. And so there is a proceeding that has been initiated against them. This is in the last part of the letter. And then if they don't show up, then, and this is the very last part before the dating clause, then they will be seen as being willfully disobedient to the sovereign. So contumacy is the English word that comes from that Latin word in there, contumnacia, which is basically, it's not like treason, but it's like contempt. You can think of it really as the ancestor of the word criminal, like contempt, criminal level of willful disobedience. So this document is, I think, a super interesting one because it could be the tip of the iceberg. Like, when the reign is being established, Joan and Violante and their officials are looking around being like, where is the money? And they're starting to investigate cases like this, which are very small. Like, this is not a large town. It is prominent because it is close to the monastery, but it's not a high population. But I think what they might be doing is collecting taxes or some kind of toll from some of the pilgrims that are going to the monastery. So this could be a significant amount of money. So here we've got a discovery that during the last 20 years of the reign of Per the Ceremonious, they were getting away with doing this thing that is cheating the royal treasury out of some funding. And so this is exactly the kind of thing that Joan and Violante are highly, highly motivated to discover, to track down and figure out, because this is going to get them some funding. These people in Monistrol de Montserrat, they're going to have to pay back this money, and I don't know how fast, and they'll probably be charged a fine on top of it. And so this is going to be just one little creek in the larger financial stream that Joan and Violante are trying to get going in order to fund their reign. And I don't know where Per the Ceremonious was getting the money for what he was doing. Maybe he was just phoning it in for the last 20 years. I don't know how they could have arrived, how Joan and Violante could have arrived to a situation where there's no money coming in, and because the monarchy had to be functioning at least at the level to pay all of the staff members and to pay for the goods that they were consuming. So it's a little bit of a mystery to me how the financial picture changed so dramatically just in about 5 months, because the monarchy had to have been functioning under Pere the Ceremonious. There might have been some kind of exodus of officials in the transition, and so maybe, there was a way that money was coming in that got lost because certain officials didn't stay through the transition. And so there's like a piece of institutional knowledge that is missing, and that's leading to a shortage of money. I don't know. But what's clear from the documents we've seen is that there is not enough money. That there's this rebellion in Sardinia, and Joan doesn't have the money at that moment to pay soldiers to go to Sardinia to put down the rebellion. That money has to be raised. We have that document written to the Archbishop of Zaragoza. It's about a month ago, in which Joan is explaining that situation. So, yeah, the financial picture is quite mysterious, but I wonder how many little towns around the realm have been doing what Monistrol de Montserrat has been doing, and whether they'll be caught also. All right, I'm so over time, but one last quick paleographic note. Look at the D in the datum, the beginning of the dating clause at the end of this document. Look at that D. It is just so ornate. That is an unseal D. This document is almost entirely in Gothic secretarial hand, but that letter D is a holdover from unseal script, a script used earlier centuries. So anyway, quick, fun paleographical note for you there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.